y'all. Well, we're back with our nicely painted chassis, and we are ready to start putting this thing together. So, first thing we're going to do is we're going to mount the power connector down here in this corner, which is this little guy right here. And I did bend over this ground lug to get it away from the switch, because when I tested it in here, this was getting a little close to the switch. Let me zoom in here a little bit. And you can see that this was getting a little close to the switch right here. And so I bent this over to make this a little easier to connect. And then this is going to be a little more difficult to film than some of my other episodes because it's all inside here. But we need to connect this ground pin to this ground lug that's going to be right here on this hole. So the first thing we want to do is get something like this little screwdriver and make sure we scrape away any paint that's around this hole. We want to make sure, even this little bit of overspray, we want to get a nice solid connection to this hole. And we're going to be using a 440 screw like this and a couple of these little things. Let me zoom in here and show you these. These little things are called K-nuts. See how it's got a little star washer made onto it that really bites into the metal? These are really good to use for this kind of application. And so the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and put this screw in place with one K-nut. And we want to tighten this thing up really good. And so we're going to use our little Weehaw Allen wrenches so they fit really nice into these screws so we can get this good and tight. And that's something you want to make sure is really tight. The next thing, we're going to be bolting one of these little solder tabs onto the wire going over to the ground. So we're going to get these little pliers and bend that up like that a little bit. And it's going to sit on that little lug like that. So we're going to be running a wire from that little solder tab over to this lug. Like that. So cut off a little piece of wire. And one of the goals of this is to keep this wire as short as we can and just out of the way. It's like the first wire we're putting in the preamp. And I always try to use a green wire for this lead because that's the kind of US color code for a ground. Gonna bend this over like this so it's mechanically connected to. And I'm gonna squeeze it down a little tighter if I can get it to cooperate. So it looks like that. And then I want it to sit like this. So we'll find something to prop the end of this wire up on while we solder it. I'm going to go ahead and get this, put the solder in there, get this wire, and prop this up. And there we go. So, the next step we're going to do is put this through the back of the amp and see I think that's a nice length for that ground. So we're going to, actually I'm going to cut it off just a breath. So then we're going to do the same thing. We're going to bend this up. And be careful, this got really hot, heating it up. And so be careful you don't burn yourself when you're messing with this, or let it cool off a little bit before you go to this next step. Like that. And then we warm this up. Make sure you get the tab hot enough for the solder to melt on it, so that it's actually got a good electrical connection. And then check this side. Make sure this is soldered good. And there we go. We have our ground, our chassis ground established. So then we feed this through. And now we just need to kind of futz around with this a little bit until we get that in place like that. Then we get another K-nut. We stack it on top of that other one so the teeth of the second one dig in to the ground leg itself. And you might want to pin that over a little like that. Try to make those really neat. Like that. And then I get my little tail locks and come in here and tighten this nut up. Now you see it's spinning a little bit with the nut. You probably want to start it a little bit counterclockwise from where it's going to end up. And I can't really show you this because I got to get my finger in here, but you hold that little tab while you tighten the nut. And then with the last little bit of rotation of the nut, the tab will rotate into place. Maybe I can show you here. There. See how the tab rotated where we want it? There we go. So now we can put our 2 bolts that hold this IC connector to the chassis. And again, we have a couple of little 440 screws, and Get a couple more K-nuts out, and the easiest way to do it is like hold the nut up and then turn it with an Allen wrench. And I think you're going to see here in just a second. Remember I warned you about not putting this too far over, this corner? Well, we got to get in here and hold this nut to put this other screw in. And I've learned from experience, if you get that socket too far over to the edge, it's a real pain. And one of the little tips is you kind of balance the nut on the tip of your finger and then roll it up onto the end of the bolt and then screw it in. And the nice thing about these little K-nuts with that washer, little star washer, once you get it kind of snug, it bites in and you don't have to hold the nut as you tighten up the screws. And see, now there's our connector, and there's our ground point and the 2 bolts holding that down. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put the standoffs on this board and temporarily mount it in place and look at where everything's going to fit. We have these little aluminum standoffs. And then we have some 440 screws. Here's our little Allen wrench. So let's go ahead and put these onto the board. And don't tighten them up yet, just kind of barely snug them up. Okay, there's the one you don't even really need the Allen. You can just hold it with the head with your finger and screw those down. And one of the things that I mentioned in the last video, we're going to be standing up the little LED. And there's our... And you'll have to excuse me, the monitor I'm looking at is not a mirror image, so it's like backwards. So if I'm looking at my monitor trying to make sure that I've got the stuff on camera, sometimes I get a little mixed up going back and forth. So I mentioned in a previous video, here's the point where the LED connects, and we drilled a hole right here. It's like vertically in this vertical plane from that LED socket. And so we're going to get a couple of pieces of wire and mount this LED so that it's sitting about right. So it's sitting about right here. So it's like this. So the dome will stick up past the standoff. And that way, when we mount this, the LED will come through this hole right here. And then we'll just have to, kind of move the board around as we're sliding it into position to get this LED to come through this hole. And then we can put all the screws in and the LED will be right there. So let's get a first glimpse of like where this board's going to sit inside this chassis. It's going to be about right there. There we go, that's much better. So you can see like the power switch is going to be right here. And this is the high voltage AC. And then right here is the heater voltage. And on the board, these two connectors are for the high voltage AC, and this is for the 6.3 volts AC. So the two heater wires will just come straight up into these two connectors. And then the high voltage will come from here up to these other two pins. And so, nice short path. The last time I put the transformer on the other side and the wires were going across the chassis, so I was trying to keep them as short as possible. That's one reason. Somebody asked in the comments, why did I put the transformer over on like the side instead of in the middle? Well, I want to keep the wires going from the transformer to the circuit board as short as possible, but we are going to twist them to help reduce the hum, but the shorter the path, the better too. So then the other thing we're going to do is, we're going to mount the switch. The wire is going to go from this is the fused terminal. And so you want the fused terminal connected to the switch. And then the switch to the transformer, and then the transformer back to the neutral. Because the way these plugs are made, this is the hot. And so you want the power to come in, go through the fuse, then go to the switch. That way if the switch shorts out to the chassis, it'll blow the fuse. And then it goes to the transformer, and then, like I said, the transformer return path comes back to the neutral. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to get these wired up and get the AC, the 110, 120 volt AC running from the socket to the switch to the transformer and mount all those parts. So one of the things we did was we drilled these 2 grommet holes, and as you can see on the transformer, one lead's got a bunch of wires and the other one's only got 2. So we put a smaller grommet in this front one. And all you do is you just kind of mush them like that until they go into place. And if you've drilled your holes right, the grommet fits nice and snug without being too ridiculous. And then you come on the other side, and you might have to get your fingernail or your finger and kind of flip this lip on the inside until it looks like that. So we've got the grommets in place. Then we get our power switch. And if you remember, we drilled this extra little hole for the locking tab. And I'm going to see if I can get a better close-up of that little locking tab for you. See that little locking tab? And then there's a little part that sticks out right there that fits into the switch. Has a little groove going up the barrel right here that little nub sticks into, and those combined keep the switch from rotating in the socket, which you could use just plain washers and not drill that extra little locking tab hole. But I just think it makes a nicer, it's like you actually went to a little trouble to make sure that this thing was installed the way it was installed the way it was supposed to be, the way they designed it to be installed. So, and then, okay, we've got a little bit too much thread sticking out. So we're going to come back, and there's a jam nut right here, and you screw this out. And it's kind of a trial and error. Then there's a little lock washer thing, and that keeps this jam nut from spinning. And again, it's not like we're installing this in an airplane where it's going to be getting a bunch of vibration or something, but we still want to do this as correct as possible. And if you get it right, you're going to have it's going to be a little tough getting the nut started, because there's not going to be a lot of thread sticking up. Again, carefully so we don't scratch the paint. Again, voice of experience here. I've had them slip and scratch the crap out of the paint, which no one's happy. And then I'm actually gonna, one thing you can do too is push the switch in the little washer forward so it fills up as much of that little hole as possible. I mean, we may have drilled it a little further away than we needed to, but, and hopefully y'all aren't going to watch me scratch this on camera. And I'll warn you about these too. When you're holding these, hold them like this. Don't like let one of your fingers sit in here, because if you're pulling down and it slips, you can crush your finger between these two things. Again, voice of experience, you don't have to get your fingers crushed like I have. So just be careful when you're holding these. Keep it kind of an open palm when you're holding this. And that way you won't have to worry about crushing your finger. So anyway, there's our pretty little switch. The other thing you want to do is you want to connect this wire to the outside here. Don't connect it to the center, because if you run this wire from here to the center, then when this thing is switched off, this pin's hot. If you go from this pin, from this terminal to here, then when you switch it off, everything's cold. Well, I did derp out here and messed up the video again. Sorry about that. But I don't think we missed anything important. The only thing that we skipped was installing these 4 bolts, and then showed you feeding these wires through the grommets before we bolted down the transformer. So I don't think that's really anything people are going to struggle with. Sorry about that, but anyway, moving on. The next video will be wiring up the transformer primary and installing the rest of the board. So hope you're enjoying this series. If you are, please subscribe, like the video, and we'll see you soon for more transformer fun. Have a great day.